When we talk about training, we tend to get caught up in topics related to exercise selection, exercise progression, training cycle design, and other planning and periodization factors. Within these discussions, the focus is generally centered on what you can do to cause changes in the body which lead to a positive result. This is logical, seeing as we all want to get stronger, faster, jump higher, and all that jazz. The problem is that if all we focus on are loading related factors within the context of what is needed to drive adaptation, we might end up overlooking what I think is the most important factor that affects our ability to train, perform, and stay motivated to train. So what is the number one priority for athletes and what they need to focus on? In my mind, the most important thing that an athlete can do if they want to perform at their best is to stay healthy and injury-free. For many of you, this may be an obvious factor to consider, but some don't quite understand the implications of injury and sickness as they relate to someone's long-term physical development and mental state. Today, we'll briefly cover some reasons why you need to make staying healthy a number one priority in your training, as well as some ideas about how you can go about actually doing that. First on the list, sickness and injury are progress killers. So getting sick or injured will invariably make it harder for you to progress over the long term. If we think about training in the absence of any training gaps, you would progressively overload over time, and your body would respond by dedicating resources to adapt to the training stress. Over time, your baseline of performance would rise as well as your performance ceiling, such that by the end of a 4-year block of training, both your best and worst performances are better than what they would have been at the start of your training. If you get sick or injured, this long-term progression gets hindered because you have to take breaks, and during these breaks, your capacity to stress the body is severely reduced. While you can still perform some training with certain types of minor injuries, it will not be a potent enough stress load to cause significant positive change until the injury is healed. Once healed, you may still be close to or even below your previous performance baseline, and it will take time to get back to where you were before your training was disrupted. If you consider the fact that training time is a scarce resource, any time that is dedicated to rehabbing an injury is time that is lost, which could have otherwise been dedicated to raising both your performance baseline and ceiling. If you only get sick or injured once every few years, this can be minimal enough to not hurt your progress too much. If, though, you end up with just only one injury and one period of sickness each season, this can become a much larger problem over the long term as you end up losing months of time, which you'll never get back. Also, just because you can heal from an injury or sickness does not always mean you will end up back where you started. Sometimes we come back from an injury or sickness and are performing worse than we were before the issue originally arose. Another thing to consider is that injury is a leading predictor of future injury. If we narrow our scope to just look at the impact of soft tissue injuries, the problem that exists is that once injured, your likelihood of future injury increases. As soft tissue gets remodeled after an injury, changes in the tissue, such as accumulation of scar tissue, can predispose you to re-injury because the remodeled tissue is not as elastic nor as resilient as healthy tissue which was never injured. This means that the best way to prevent injury is to never get injured in the first place. Obviously, this is easier said than done. But if you're someone who has never had a soft tissue injury, consider this a gift and something that is well worth preserving. If instead you have been injured before, you need to make every effort possible to make sure that you do not overstress the areas that are giving you problems to the point that you become prone to re-injury. While it may be challenging to do so, it is possible, but you need to be very disciplined with how your training is set up and allow yourself extra recovery for areas of the body that have given you trouble in the past. Now, there are some strategies for injury prevention, and I'll touch on those briefly here. Since preventing injury or sickness gives us better probabilities for improving at whatever we're training for, we need to place a heavy emphasis on prevention when we think about training plans and recovery habits. Here we'll discuss a few ideas for how you can best prevent injury or sickness as you train towards your goals. First to think about is sleep and recovery are keys to success. If you want to stay healthy, you need to focus diligently on high quality, high quantity sleep. Also, your training needs to allow for ample recovery so you can show up to your training sessions in a good physical state of readiness. Do your best to ensure that you have consistent sleep schedules and that you do things which allow for optimal sleep quality. For example, you don't want to go to bed at 1 a.m. one day, 10 a.m. the next day, and 2 a.m. the following day. This will throw your circadian rhythm off and you'll not be able to reliably predict how you'll recover from your training. Aim to fall asleep around the same time every night and minimize any situations which may disrupt this pattern, such as heavy partying or playing video games too deep into the night. Since sleep quality is as or more important than sleep quantity, you should also practice good habits on a daily basis so that your pre-bed routine allows for good quality sleep. You should avoid staring at screens such as your phone, computer, or TV within an hour or more of when you want to fall asleep. Instead of watching a YouTube video or a TV show, consider listening to it instead. Also, avoid listening to loud, stimulating music when it is getting close to your bedtime. Consider instead listening to something that is calming, or simply remove all visual and auditory stimuli so your brain can settle and let your body prepare for sleep. I like to do some foam rolling, percussion massage, and light stretching before bed with the lights off. This helps me get relaxed and out of my own head, and if done regularly, this can be a signal to the body that you may be preparing to sleep. Just like we want to have consistent sleep schedules, keeping a consistent pre-bed routine can be useful for regulating the sleep schedule that you want to have. So another way to reduce the risk of injuries or sickness is to make sure that you're aware of the density of stress in your program. For example, a 6-day program with 4 days of fast sprinting has a higher density of stress than a 6-day program with only 1 day of fast sprinting. Similarly, high densities of high volume work can set the body up for failure at some point if these dense periods of stress exist without enough recovery. Start out with lower densities of highly stressful training and see how your body adapts. If you see improvement, you can stick with that training setup until your improvement stagnates. If you do end up adding in more days of high-intensity training, be very careful to pay attention to any problem areas or signs of upper respiratory illness, cutting down your training loads when soft tissue or illness-related symptoms begin to appear. Often a future injury will present first as a sensation of discomfort or excess tension, and these signs should be heeded and dealt with. Sickness can initially present as a feeling of being run down, your throat being scratchy, or feeling like your heart rate won't settle down post-workout, along with a general feeling of being unwell. If these warning signs pop up, consider reducing training load, adding in extra days of rest, or changing exercises to something that does not aggravate whatever issue it is that you're dealing with. If caught early, these issues can be taken care of without leading to a serious training gap as a result of serious injury or illness. Now, last but not least, we can set ourselves up for success by making sure our body's internal environment is optimized for handling stress through what we eat. For example, if you're low on vitamin D, zinc, and magnesium, you might end up more likely to get sick as compared to if you had healthy levels of these nutrients. If you chronically undereat relative to your caloric demands from your training, you may end up at a higher risk of injury as tissues are not able to be repaired properly if the material used for repair is not available in high enough quantities. Make sure that you're eating enough protein, carbohydrates, and healthy fats in a well-balanced manner. Make sure you're also eating enough sources of food that provide you with micronutrients and antioxidants so that your body processes can function properly. Micronutrients are often used as cofactors for various recovery-related processes in the body, and a shortage of micronutrients can leave you with a reduced ability to recover, even if macronutrient intake and recovery qualities are in a good place. Berries, leafy greens, and high-quality meats are all good sources of various nutrients that your body needs. Focus first on building a healthy diet before you move to supplementation, with vitamin D being one of your first priorities when it comes to supplementation. Now, just to wrap things up, as you can see, injury and sickness need to be avoided at all costs so that you can train consistently and reap the benefits of high-quality, consistent training. If you can manage the densities of your training stress, make sure your recovery habits are of a high quality, and that your diet ensures you're taking in enough macro and micronutrients to allow for proper recovery, then you're going to be in a good place. If you start to see signs that an injury or a sickness may be brewing, take the appropriate steps to shift or reduce stress loads and maximize recovery. If you can stop a problem early, you may get away with minimal impact to your training. If instead you ignore the warning signs and lack the discipline to take the steps necessary to stay healthy, you may be digging your own grave with regards to your long-term development and ultimate performance in sport.